Hi guys, right, okay, so we're back to work on the Turbo ST today. Now, I'm not happy with the fact that my fuel pressure reading is wrong in my dashboard. Now, if you haven't seen my last video, quick recap. The pressure reading from my fuel pressure sensor is reading about 12 psi at idle. That should be closer to sort of 34 or something like that. So somewhere along the way it's gone wrong. I've done loads of tests, I checked my voltages to the sensor, everything tested out fine, and it looked like it was a faulty sensor. Now since then I've replaced the sensor, and again faulting in exactly the same way. And I've actually fit 3 sensors. Now the sensors, although I've used the same type of sensor, just to save remaking anything, redoing wiring, things like that, I've basically bought them from different places. So I've got 3 different sensors and they all fault in exactly the same way. So I'm not sure whether or not it is an actual sensor fault now or if there's something deeper. I'm worried that I might have damaged the output of the ECU or something like that. But that is what we're going to get into today and just finally get to the bottom of why these sensors aren't reading correctly. And just before I do rip it all apart, I have checked the actual fuel pressure. I've checked it multiple times and that is absolutely fine. So it's not an actual fuel pressure issue, it's purely just the reading that I'm getting to the ECU and to the dash, the information. So these are the sensors that I've had. There's one here and one that's in there that are reading incorrectly. Now I did have one, I was in there for probably about 9 months, worked absolutely fine. Now since that one packed up, I've had nothing but issues with incorrect readings. Now I'm wondering whether or not my ECU is actually faulty, and that's been the problem the whole time. So what I'm going to do is I have very kindly been given this sensor to try out. It's still 150 psi sensor, just a slightly different style. So what I'm going to do is be using that one. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to dig out the wiring from the link ECU. So with the ECU disconnected, what I then am going to do is measure the voltage from the sensor and see what readings I get back. Now I'm also again going to check all the voltage and ground at this sensor just to make sure that's good, which it was last time, but just double checking, cover all the bases. And then what I'm going to do, if that tests out fine, is I'm going to put the wire into the ECU into a different auxiliary input and see whether or not I still have the same issue. And if I don't, it looks like I've got an issue with the auxiliary on the ECU. I could obviously put the wire back into the original one and see if it damages that sensor. It's obviously a waste of a sensor, but that's what I may end up doing just to prove the point. So yeah, faulty ECU or not, let's get digging in and see what the outcome is. Right, so with the ignition on, it's a little tricky one-handed because I haven't got a mount from the camera, but if I go to, you can see that is the voltage wire of my sensor. I'm getting my 5 volts, which it should be. Now the other one is a ground, so I shouldn't be picking up any voltage, which I'm not. So that's good. And then the other one is obviously the signal wire back to the ECU. I will just check it for a voltage, why not? Some residues there, I don't know if that's right or not, but nothing to write home about. So if I change this to a resistance value, just making sure my ground
is there. So that's the ground through the ECU. So that's good. What I also did do on the voltage setting is I went across the 2 pins, and again I had 5 volts. So my 5 volt is there and is good. Right, okay, on to the next check. So one thing I love about these Link ECUs are the connectors. Now I've found the wire, which is this white wire here. That is my signal wire to my fuel pressure. So what I'm going to do is isolate the wire by removing it. Now on these ECUs, it's just a case of there's a little white tag here. There's 2 on the other side, but you just need to push it. Hear it click. So that now has pushed those little tags out. Then this wire should, if I can do it one-handed, let's see if I can do it one-handed. There we go. Just give it a bit of a tug, and it pulls out. And there we go. That's the pin out, and I can just clip this back together. There we go. And that's ready to go back in. So yeah, that's one thing I do really enjoy about these pins. It makes repopulating and testing very, very straightforward. So now I'm going to test the continuity of this wire, and if that's good, I'm then going to rig up a pressure gauge onto the sensor itself, plug these back in, and test the voltage I get out of this wire. So this wire is now attached to that white wire I took out of the multi-plug at the ECU. You can see connected through the multimeter, and just to prove it out, there's the signal wire there. So whatever I get the reading from this wire as a voltage will be what the sensor reads. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this new sensor here, plug it in, turn the ignition on, and then see what the voltage is at this wire when I apply some pressure. I just scribbled it down a little bit. I'm expecting 0.77 at 10 psi and 1.03 at 20 psi. So that's what I'm hoping for, and let's see what it actually gives us. So let's rig some up here and give it a go. So that's not going to quite work. With that sensor in there, I'm reading 2.4 volts, so it should be 0.5 because there's 0 pressure. So I wonder if the wiring is slightly different on this sensor rather than the other ones. I'll have a quick little look at that. Right, so this gets a little bit strange. I've just got an old sensor on there, and I'm just going to ignition on so I can get my 5 volts. And I'm reading 0.5 basically of a volt, which is what it would be at 0 pressure. Now if I pump this up to about 10 psi, now it's not holding pressure, but if I get to about 10 and then look at the gauge, I'm getting 0.77. Now according to my little notes, 0.77, 10 psi. So that actually appears to read right. So that's a fly in the ointment, isn't it? So let's go up to 20 psi then. Right, a few technical errors, but let's try and get this up to 20 psi. You get what? It's a fraction over 20, but 20, so that's reading 1.03. 1.03. And according to my notes, 1.03, 20 psi. So that sensor does actually seem to be right. So why is it reading wrong on the dash when I got my fuel pressure tester on it and it says it's okay? Oh, this is gonna so I don't know if I'm getting anywhere or not, or just running around in circles. So everything seems to be testing absolutely fine at the minute. So that's an old sensor that tests okay. The wiring tests okay. I'm getting the 5 volts out of there. Now I did previously do a fuel pressure test, and that was fine. That was 45 psi, which is where I set it to. So what I'm going to do, I think, is plug the sensor back in to the one that's fitted into the regulator, turn the fuel pump on, and see what voltage I get out of this signal wire. Now I was only getting something like 1.07, I think it was, before. So this with it connected into the ECU. So let's see what I get when it's not connected into the ECU and see if that reading is different. Right, okay, so quick bit of maths. I'm hoping, or not hoping, whichever way you look at it, I should be getting 1.705 volts at 45 psi. Okay, so that's the figure of 45. Now, when I did the fuel pressure test, it was reading 45. So what I'm going to do is turn the fuel pump on. I'm just waiting for the computer to load up. And then I'm going to see what voltage I get on the reading. Sensor's all plugged back in into the main one in the rail. So bear with me while this boots up. I'll show you the result. Okay, so we're looking at the fuel pump, and I'm just going to turn this on. And the pump's running. And we are getting 1.1. So 1.1. So yeah, we are reading 20 psi, or somewhere between 20 and 30, 22 maybe. So the sensor output, or at least that one in there, is reading 1.1. I'm going to swap it to the other sensor I was just testing with, because obviously that was reading right at the lower ranges. So let's just swap them around and see what that one reads. Something interesting to note actually is we're reading 0 volts with it plugged in. Now it should read 0.5 of a volt. Okay, so does that confuse things or make it clearer? Right, I'm going to pop this one out and see what that reads. So with the second sensor back in there, look, as you can see, this is just dropping and dropping and dropping. Now that is what I experience when I'm on the dashboard. Okay, so this just keeps going down. Probably hear the fuel pump running. Pump's just running, all turned on. And it will drop and drop and drop. Okay, so 1.2, what was 1.2 approximately? Again, under 30 psi. We're still on the way down. So I'm going to take the sensor back out again, retest it now with the old pressure gauge, and see where it reads. Because obviously that's not right. And again, interestingly enough, I've lost voltage. Remember I was reading 0.5 with it plugged in? Ignition's still on. But I've lost 0.5. Where's that gone? Anyone got any ideas? Because I am losing it a little bit. Right, okay, so it's the next day. Obviously I got nowhere with it yesterday, not really. Now it appears
why I'm getting the wrong reading on the dash is because I'm losing the 0.5 of a volt that it should be at 0 psi, or just normal open pressure. Now, it only seemed to happen once I plugged it into the rail. So it seems like it's not reacting with the fuel correctly. So what I'm going to do is I am going to rewire the new sensor in, because the pins are slightly different. I did as well actually wire in a complete new multi-plug or a connector. Cut the old one off, put the new one on just in case there was anything funky going on in the pins, but that didn't make any difference. So I'm going to get the new sensor all wired in correctly, and I'm also probably going to leave some tails of wiring till I can measure the 5 volts and make sure it continues to stay 5 volts the entire time at the sensor, just in case there's something funky going on there. And yeah, wish me luck, I guess. Right, so I sometimes wonder about my sanity when trying to diagnose these things. This is what I've knocked up. I've basically got the wires, the 5 volt and the ground wire go into a sensor plug. Then I've spliced into those wires, go into this multimeter, and this should always read 5 volts. And then this multimeter will read the sensor output, so I can see what I'm actually reading. So first off, I'm going to put the ignition on, and this should read 5 volts. Right, so I'm getting 4.98. So that's close enough. I mean, I think it is. Obviously, the connections are just twisted together, so it might be putting doubt in the system. Why not? So yeah, let's get the sensor connected up. See what this reads. And like magic, 0.5. Right, okay. So that, and we've still got the 4.98. So as long as that stays the same, it should be fine. Let's now get some pressure gauges on it and see what we read. Right, okay, so we're reading 0.5, no PSI, with 4.99 volts. Got my sheet here of where they should read at what PSI. So let's just get this pumped up. So that's about 5 PSI. 6.4, we're at 6.6. So we're in the realms of where we need to be. And still 5 volts. Go to 10. Where are we looking? 7.7. We're 8.2. Still 4.99. Let's go 15. 9.1. We're 9.3. Dropping a little bit because we're losing a little vacuum. But we're still like in the ballpark. Right, so I hope that sort of came out okay. So that, although it was a little bit fluctuating, I think it's more of just the setup that I got, the test setup. So it's within the ballpark of where it needs to be. It's certainly not half a volt out. And when I've turned it off, it goes back to half a volt. So as far as that stands, I'm happy that that is working correctly. Right, I'm going to screw this into the rail now and see if I get any problems at all. Right, so we're getting 0.5 of a volt, 5 volts, sensors in and plugged in. So that is still working perfectly. Let's get the fuel pump on, see what happens. Fuel pump on. Now wish me luck. I'm looking for around about 1.7 volts. 1.8. Still 5 volts. And that is a steady 1.8 as well. I'm just going to leave this running now, probably for a minute, and just see if it changes. Well, I think that's been long enough. So 1.8 still, just holding solid.
So that sensor is 100% okay. Right, I'm gonna get all this wiring back as it should be, remove all of the extra bits, get the whole thing back as it should, and see where we go. Hi guys, so it was a faulty sensor. I should have trusted my testing the first time round and just replaced this for a different type to begin with. The only reason I stuck with it is because the first one worked for 9-10 months, so I just thought it'd be alright. I could deal with that, replacing them every so often, but yeah, it's caused me a lot of pain in the backside this time. Anyway, it's sorted, it's fixed. It just leaves me with this mess to tidy up. So I will see you next time, and we'll probably have a little look at the subframe.